So for this presentation, Art Harman, who's the president of Coalition to Save Manned Space Exploration, is going to talk to us about Artemis 2024 and the battle for lunar water. Take it away, Art.
Well, thank you so much. I run the Coalition to Save Manned Space Exploration. You can see my info on the screen. And one of the things that I've been looking at very closely and have even before I worked in Congress on such issues is the incredibly narrow time frame we have to return to the moon. Because we're not alone. Hold on a second. But on this anniversary of the Apollo 11 landing, we're gathered because we all have an interest in developing the moon. To some, that may mean building or financing a base. It may mean building a colony, manufacturing or mining ventures, investing in the industry, building infrastructures. To others, developing the moon may mean visiting the moon or just supporting our new space age. To students, you might want a career in any of the fields necessary to establish a human presence on the moon and Mars. It's going to be an incredible field for you. And there's going to be so many exciting opportunities, whether you're coding, whether you're an engineer, or anything. It's going to take so many different tasks to get us to the moon and on to Mars. However, everything you want to do on the moon in the next decade or half century, all the dreams and aspirations you have, all of the goals that you think you want to do, America should do, everybody. It all depends on one variable, one single variable, and that is it Starship, Artemis, NASA budgets, rich philanthropists? Yes and no. It's not really a thing, it's a date. Now, Artemis has a target date of 2024 currently to reach the moon and return the next man and the first woman to the south pole of the moon. Could be Elon Musk will land passengers on the moon independently around then on a Starship. But either way, 2024 is the date you want to keep in mind. However we get there really isn't the point. Miss that date by much, and all of our dreams and plans might be shelved for a half century or longer. Why? Well, already that's because China intends to conquer the lunar South Pole in the mid-2020s and to claim the water ice barren craters as their territory, just as they're now claiming the South China Sea is theirs and imposed tyranny on Hong Kong in violation of that treaty. Already, China has launched 2 rovers to the moon. Their Long March 5B is past its return to flight and will be used to launch their military space station later this year. 5B is their Falcon 9 class human-rated launcher. And they're also progressing on building their SLS class clone, the Long March 9 Super Heavy. In some ways, this will be even larger than SLS Block 2 and approaching SpaceX's Super Heavy Starship in capacity. And they also just tested their new Orion-like capsule. They're building the infrastructure. They're really finished most of the infrastructure they're building. If you go to Hainan Island, you'll see what looks like the Kennedy Space Center, a huge vehicle assembly building, launch pads capable of launching everything from small to massive rockets. They are duplicating in many ways what we did in the 1960s at the same pace as well. But here's why time is of the essence, why we can't wait until 2028, as the chairwoman of the House Science Committee suggests, or longer, or just putting it on the back burner and saying whenever. And this is why. What you see on the screen, the head of China's lunar program described the moon and Mars using the names of the islands they are trying to seize. This is a hint that they will treat the moon as they do the South China Sea and Hong Kong. And again, time is of the essence. This isn't fiction. This isn't from the movie Ad Astra, where you saw great battles on the moon with tactical rovers. I'm not sure those will ever happen. But the words were chilling. The universe is like the ocean. The moon is like the Diaoyu Islands, and Mars is like Huangyang Island. And these are indeed China's names for the islands that in the South and East China Sea they have or are trying to illegally seize and turn into giant military bases. Seized from other countries who have actual claims to those islands. And then they're building them out and making them into these huge military bases. What they're doing is they're violating 400 years of freedom of the seas. They're violating the Law of the Sea Convention that was even upheld in international court. The names used here, Diaoyu Islands and Huangyang Island, that was not an accident. It was a warning. It was a threat, really, that back down, don't go to the moon, and that's ours. You can have Mars, maybe. And you know what? Maybe this worked on the previous administration. Maybe they did back down. Maybe they said, we'll go to Mars, not the moon. Give that to China. But that doesn't, that'll destroy our ability to return to the moon and have any commercial activities there at all. Sometimes China issues threats like this to gain surrender and inaction from their adversaries, and certainly this suckered past American leaders and corporations for decades. We surrendered our wealth in manufacturing so that regime could build their military and their space program at our expense. When you buy something that says made in China, that's financing China's military, China's space program. I mean, do it if you want, but I'd much rather, be financing through spending things in America to things that'll eventually end up in NASA's budget through taxes. So indeed, America is taking the space race seriously with China. It's not new that China is in a race with us. What's new is that for the first time, we've joined the race. We intend to win. And here's why that's important. Now, this is the South China Sea on the screen. And what they're doing is they're claiming an area that extends thousands of miles from China as theirs. And the blue lines are the territorial limits of each country in there, and everything else is international waters protected by treaties and agreements. But they're just, invading even the economic zones of other countries, going up to the beaches of Brunei and the Philippines, and seizing all the islands in the middle. So this is a threat that we have to take seriously. China intends to be on the moon by 2025. And if you look at this chart from China, you'll see in kind of faint letters, independent missions to the moon, meaning individual, their rovers and so forth. Actually, a funny thing is they marked up, and this was put out by China's National Space Agency. They marked up a NASA map. So you'll see in there SLS, and other things like that, the gateway. And it's kind of funny that they stole our map to map out their program. But I've seen others that are more indigenous, but this one was funny. So they're in the early 2020s, they're targeting independent missions to the moon, as they call it. That's their rovers. That'll be their sample return mission. That'll have a robot that sends back samples of water ice from the South Pole in a couple of years. And then in the blue, I'm sorry, in the on the right, it'll say that's when they are building their base. And you look at the graph and it's halfway between 2020 and 2020 and 2030. This is when they intend to do it. Now, if you listen to their official proclamations, you look at their 5-year plans and everything, they talk about the 2030s to land humans on the moon. Well, number one, this is strategic deception. This is how China operates. They pretend they're a cuddly panda bear and that's business friendly. You can do business with us. You can visit China. But they're starting to shed that, sort of like the wolf taking off the sheep's clothing, because they feel they no longer need it. This is why they took over Hong Kong this year. The world's weakened by coronavirus. So they felt they could take that, and they did. And the United Nations, silent. I mean, they'll put out probably a dozen resolutions attacking the only democracy in the Middle East, Israel, but silence from the United Nations. So they're utterly useless in this, but you have to keep this in mind because they mean this, you know, like in the earlier slide, the moon is like the Dawei Islands. They've built their infrastructure. As I said, Hainan Island, it looks like KSC, and you know what? They're even having tours. They've got, you know, tours just like we have at Kennedy. They're doing it right. If you want to lead in space, if you want to dominate in space, they're doing everything by the book. They've been building their rockets, their Long March 5. They're working on the Long March 9, and they could even do missions in theory with a bunch of Long March 5 if they have problems with their 9, their SLS clone. So why does this matter to you? I mean, global politics and all that, right? We'll all be friends in space. It's different. Yeah. No. Unfortunately, the same people on Earth will be in space with the same intentions and goals. Here in the West, we intend to come in peace for all mankind. That's what Neil Armstrong and Buzz Aldrin, the plaque they left on the moon 51 years ago today. And so it's important to recognize others don't have the same goals we do, or the same peaceful goals. And US commercial space and the free world could lose this race, endangering access to the lunar poles where water ice will sustain settlements and colonies, perhaps for centuries to come. China is still violating the law of the sea treaty every day. They won't hesitate to withdraw from or violate and ignore the Outer Space Treaty, or even find ways to legally steal the poles by stretching the intent of the treaty. What's the solution? It's neither confrontations in space nor diplomacy. China respects no sovereignty but its own, and they would be happy to start a war in space. We don't want a war in space, but China is eager for wars. And that can be tough for our peaceful culture to think even possible. You know, who wants war? Well, throughout history, most countries have. And that's led to the bloody world wars. It's led to terrorism. It's led to just strife throughout all of the ages as this country says, I want to take that country and I want to dominate the world. And so throughout the 20th century, we had China and Hitler and Russia who actually planned world domination. And now we're faced with a China under Xi Jinping, whose goals are exactly the same, world domination. Their goal is 2049, but they're ahead of that. And what that means is that by 2049, they'll be able to dictate everything to the world. You live under our rules, and freedom will not be something that will be on the table to support. But what is the answer? Well, it's simply to join together NASA, SpaceX, and commercial space, our ISS partners, development experts like you, in an all-out, no-holds-barred race to the South Pole by 24, and then establish an international permanent presence. And that's the plans. By 2028, we would have a permanent manned presence on the moon. We would have, something that would be a flag on the moon saying, we're here, many flags, but also many, many commercial companies and private people. Now, there's enough room on the moon for all nations near the ice-bearing craters and free world bases. China can coexist there along with SpaceX and, the Galactic Mining Company or whatever Elon will name whatever ventures he starts there. And so, you look at the image on these two images, they're same images of the South Pole, and there's actually quite a bit of space. That won't stop China from saying, well, this entire area is our field of operation under the Outer Space Treaty, so it's ours. And if you go there, they don't need guns on the moon. All they do is they just say, you want rare earth minerals? You're not going to the moon. Well, there are rare earth minerals on the moon, so we would be in good company to go there and find our own supplies. So it boils down to this: if we're on the moon by 2024 and we maintain a national presence, we will help secure access to the moon for all mankind. And this is another point where it's wise to look at the South China Sea for guidance, because in the South China Sea, the right of navies, the right of commercial shipping and private ships to operate freely in those international waters, and the right to the South China Sea nations, the nations bordering it, to freely exercise their sovereignty, is maintained at present only by the US running freedom of navigation patrols. And China's conquest is complete. A NASA presence on the moon sends a signal to our adversaries not to interfere. But it doesn't have to be a NASA base here and a commercial base there. What we'll most likely see is the first base in 2028 and growth from that. It'll be a small NASA base to start with international partners and built by commercial space and incorporating private ventures from around the world, everything from research and manufacturing to tourism. Perhaps it'll even be built and owned by commercial entities, maybe ones that you start and run. And part of it just leased to NASA. But that NASA meatball and the American flag make all the difference in world affairs. This is a big thing. So I'd suggest erecting a huge "We came in peace for all mankind" sign, make it 200 feet high, so that we boldly proclaim what it's all about, peace for all mankind. Now, some say we can't militarize space. China's space program is their military. This is their first two female astronauts wearing their military uniforms. And this is a Chinese military radar plan, a sketch of it, to be able to map every military asset, virtually every military asset in the world within 24 hours. It would be like hundreds of miles long, their antenna. And so this is one of the ways they can militarize space in a way that will make the free nations more weakened towards them. So our presence helps prevent wars or preemptive surrender. Now, if we falter, if we scrap the return to the moon, if we succumb to politics, we can't spend that much, it's not sustainable, you'll never be able to go there without bowing to Beijing. If we delay till 2028 or forever, as in the House of Representatives authorization bill, we hand the moon to China, the important parts. There's few square miles with the water ice. That's why we can't just say, you take that part, we'll take this part. No, the water ice is where humanity will live for centuries to come because of the water. Now that raises an interesting question. Could you run an industry or colony on the moon under Chinese domination? Maybe. This is the GM factory in China that I toured some years ago. And it's 51% run by a Chinese company, owned. When I toured through it, all throughout it are Communist Party propaganda posters, awards by the Communist Party for employees being good communists. So if you're a quiet and effective employee, then your name will be up there. If you complain about working conditions, your name won't. If you were seen to be listening to the Voice of America or other foreign broadcasts about freedom, or you said, I think the folks in Hong Kong have a good case, your name won't be there, and the next morning you may not return to work at all. So what might happen is you cut a deal and you have a 51% Chinese partner, Chinese spies on your shop and on your board of directors. You never say a word about China. You're gagged. And they would still kick you out of the partnership after they've mined all of your technology. That's how they operate. A deal with the devil. Do you ever hear the Al Wilson song, The Snake? You knew darn well I was a snake before you brought me in. Oh, it's a fun song, but it shows how China operates all the time. They fool you, they sucker you in, and then they pull your feet out from under you. Now, in addition to securing safe access to all, how can we create a framework for the rule of law in space and respecting each other's rights and property? Have you read the Artemis Accords? You certainly should. The Accords are the framework NASA prepared to establish a rule of law, just a very basic rule of law in space. They call it safe, peaceful, and prosperous future. Essentially to protect free access and allow ventures to have rights to their property and profits. Here's the sections. Peaceful purposes, transparency, interoperability, that's open standards, providing emergency assistance, registration of space objects, sharing scientific data, protecting heritage, don't just desecrate landing sites, space resources, deconfliction of activities, and preventing orbital debris and spacecraft disposal. Now let's look at three of those. The three most important are peaceful purposes, space resources, and deconfliction. Space resources, first, peaceful purposes. International cooperation on Artemis enhances peaceful purposes between nations. All activities would be required to be conducted for peaceful purposes. Space resources is all about extracting and utilizing resources on the moon, Mars, and asteroids. And to be able to own what you create, to be able to say, okay, so I'm going to establish a mine, and this mine and its equipment is mine, and the proceeds, when I take them home, they're mine because I did it. Now, the Moon Treaty would bar that. This is why we have the Artemis Accords, because the Moon Treaty basically have to share everything with the entire world and so forth, and there would be no free enterprise on the moon or anywhere else. Deconfliction of activities. Now, this is perhaps the most important one. What this does is it basically sets a framework for establishing what they call safety zones. Now, that safety zone would be your factory, your mine, your habitat, your hotel, your coffee shop, and your propellant depot. And and under the agreement, then everybody coordinates and notifies each other. Okay, so this area here, that's mine. Okay, that's yours. Okay, I'm not going to intrude into yours, and so forth. So all of our ISS partners are signing on to the Accords except for Russia. They're veering towards cooperating as a junior partner with China on lunar missions and ruling out being, unfortunately, being an Artemis partner. But they have little commercial space industry to want to protect, and they don't mind harming our setting the rules, which would create structure for peaceful cooperation in space. Putin is not like that. But what's the point? China won't sign the agreement, right? They won't sign the accord because they intend to violate every part of it. So the accords might become a free world versus tyranny battle. But the moral suasion aspect of the accords in international opinion cannot be ignored in compelling them to behave. For example, China's furious the International Court upheld Philippines' ownership of islands China's militarizing. So it does help slow them down and restrain them somewhat, but it especially gave the Philippines a greater desire and backbone to fight back. Now, how can you participate in assuring free world and commercial access to the lunar South Pole? How can you protect your plans for lunar development? You know, number one, go ahead with them, put your all into it. But the battle is being fought in Congress now, and every year until 2024. This is where your influence can make a difference. By the way, moderator, let me know if I have when I have limited time.
Nope, you don't. We can run as long as you like.
Great. Now, the House of Representatives' current bill would flatline NASA's budget, and versions of the bill would effectively kill a return to the moon at all, at least certainly within a short period of time, like 2024. And to put it bluntly, the House could literally award the moon to China for decades. And sadly, in today's hyper-partisanship environment, some may prefer that than to allow anyone else to take credit for it. Now, that's really a scary thought. Here's House Science Committee Chairwoman Eddie Bernice Johnson. Her shocking declaration. I touched on this a moment ago. The simple truth is that we are not in a space race to get to the moon. We won that race a half century ago. Do I have that on screen? Nah, sorry. The simple truth is we are not in a space race to get to the moon. We won that race a half century ago, as this year's commemoration of Apollo 11 makes clear. She accused the vice president of using outdated Cold War rhetoric about an adversary seizing the strategic high ground. And I respected the chairwoman when I worked for a congressman on the science committee, but her false comment, I mean, she gets all the briefings from DOD, from NASA and so forth. She knows the scoop, but her partisanship refuses to allow her to address it and pay attention to it. And so she and we must learn not only from history, but current events. What's in the news every day? China crushing Hong Kong, 1 million Uyghurs in concentration camps, 1 million. Militarizing the South China Sea and China's open declaration that the Mars and Moon are like the islands they're seizing. And if we haven't been back in a century, and here's where the chairwoman is so wrong, we haven't been back in half a century, China feels they have a right to claim conquest of whatever they want. And they've even said that, you haven't been back. They mocked us for building the gateway, going for the gateway a few years ago, very rightly. And they sort of, one of their space heads said, you know, you guys are fools. The LOP G, as it was known then, has limited economic utility and is a delay. And we're just going to be building a base directly on the moon. So those really are the stakes. The story doesn't necessarily end well because we want it to end well. And especially it won't end if we don't defend our efforts, our interests. So therefore, what can you do? What can you do? Well, because this battle is being fought in Congress, you know, as I've said on many radio shows, it's not technology. We have the technology to get back to the moon. We've had it for decades. Heck, we had it in the 1960s. Your phone has more computing power than the Apollo lander. One gag I pull on the radio is I'll have the engineer cue up a kitchen blender sound. And so when I'm describing that we have the technology to go to the moon and Mars now, today, take your phone, put it in your blender. Each piece you pick out of the blender has more computing power than the Apollo lander. And that's true. So the only thing standing between us and returning to the moon by 2024 is the national will, and particularly Congress. But you can do a lot. Number one, call your members of Congress supporting the president's budget request for NASA. That's important, because if you just call and say, oh, we should go to the moon by 2024, that's not the message they need to hear. They need to hear you're supporting the president's budget request, because they're putting together the appropriations bills. That's called the money bill. And here's another thing. When you call your member of Congress, do not talk to the receptionist. I mean, talk to the receptionist, but if you leave a message, tell the congressman we should go back to the moon by 24 and to support the president's request. Now, I worked in Congress. I know how all this works. So if you tell the receptionist a message like that, they just write it down, you know, tick a little box, basically saying somebody said something about NASA. Pro-NASA, you know, maybe there's even a little tick box on a form, and that's it. You could have spent better time, you know, getting another cup of coffee. But here's the secret. This is the secret to getting some influence in Congress. And if you haven't tried this, do it every time you have something important to communicate with Congress. You call up, you talk to the receptionist and you say, what's the name of your space legislative assistant or NASA legislative assistant? And they'll tell you, write it down. By the way, in Hill slang, you can just say LA, just like you're saying Los Angeles, LA. Who's the NASA LA? And they'll give you the name, and then ask for the email address of that person, and they'll give it to you. and then ask to be connected. If they're available, and these days with VoIP phone, even though they're working at home from their living room, they may be able to take the call if they want. More likely you'll leave them a voicemail, or they'll just say, send them an email, and they may or may not call you. But in that email, you're actually now communicating with the person who briefs their boss on space policy. So you're way, way up from, just leaving a message. I, like NASA, would be treated the same as support the president's budget request when talking to the receptionist. Now, the receptionist does a tough job. And usually they're interns fresh out of school, and they're working hard, they're learning the ropes and so forth. So I'm no gripe on them, but you want to speak to the person who has influence on the congressman or the senator. So when you call and you get a hold of the legislative assistant, then send them an email or talk to them. State your case concisely, and again, you ask for the support for the president's budget, and you ask for support for Artemis by 2024, as the president has said. Now, if you're talking to a Democrat, you may just say 2024 is important for so many reasons, including China. Now, if you don't get an answer to an email, send it again several times, every few days. Why? Because they, probably like you, get hundreds of emails a day. And so you send an email and there's 100 other emails that are largely junk or from lobbyists and so forth. You also get lost. Send it 3 or 4 times, they'll probably see it. Better yet, request a meeting with the member when they're in the district. They may be doing virtual meetings, virtual town halls these days, so that you can actually talk to the member of Congress. The work you do in developing space, whether it's just advocating for space, we should get to the moon and go to Mars and so forth, whether you're involved in a venture or you want to, whether you're, whatever it is, that's worth telling to the member of Congress and the staffer. It gives you a little bit of credibility. You're not just somebody calling and talking to them, and they will take you seriously. Don't ever send a letter by mail to Congress. It can take weeks, literally, to get through security. It goes to a remote facility. It gets baked to 150 degrees. It gets x-rayed and so forth. And then it'll probably be scanned and electronically delivered to some intern, and they may or may not really put the importance on it. If you want to have something that's on your letterhead, yes, do that. But, email that to the legislative assistant once you're in communications with them. That's the way to send a letter these days. So in closing, in order for you to do your development work, which is what's important to everyone here, or just your advocacy of becoming the spacefaring society we want, of having a base that maybe one day you or your children will be able to visit, of seeing starships flying everywhere and being able to land anywhere they want. That's what we're protecting today. Land anywhere they want. If China says this is our defense zone on the South Pole, you're welcome to go to the Sea of Tranquility, where there's no water, and eke out an existence there. But sorry, guys, those are the stakes. I can't emphasize it enough. I've heard too much. I've seen too much. I've read too much. And so in this brief presentation, my goal is to urge you to see the importance of 2024. Whether it's Artemis or whether Elon is starting to run shuttles to the moon on Starship by that time, doesn't matter. We've got to have that presence on the South Pole by 2024. Have some flags there, American and everyone else that believes in freedom of access. So, what are we doing? We're trying to fulfill the hope expressed in the plaque Neil Armstrong and Buzz Aldrin left on the moon 51 years ago today. And I encourage your assistance. So thank you all very much. You can learn more it's on the screen, savemanspace.com. It's also Save Man Space on Facebook and Twitter. Info at Save Man Space. Be delighted to talk to you and continue the conversation. And so at this point, thank you all so much. I'll be happy to answer any questions.
Thanks, Art. Lots to think about. Yeah, we got time for just some really quick questions because we've really kind of run over, but that's okay. Paul Schrum asks, on the map of the South Pole, what do the blue areas in the right image represent? Asking because they are different from the blue areas on the left.
Yeah, that's a good question, and I don't know. I guess it's different spectral or temperatures. I don't know. I put this in and I cut off the all of the text below that probably explains that, but it's probably reflections and temperatures and so forth.
All right, no problem. Cole asks, what are the optimal dimensions / surface area of safety zone around surface operations at the lunar South Pole?
Good question. It kind of depends on what you're doing. If you have a small experiment to do some water ice mining in a crater, you may need sort of a right of way into the crater for your equipment and so forth. If you're having a base of your own, then that expands it. If you're having a landing zone, that expands it. And obviously, you're not going to put your landing zone, your landing pad right next to the crater you want to be mining. You want to put that just like at NASA. You want to put that about as far away as possible from your habitat and everything. So you might have a landing zone that's so many meters and kilometers around or something, and that's kind of out in the distance. And then you've got a maybe your right of way path or some commonly agreed upon way to get to your area of operations. Good question.
Owen Chbani asks, how would you suggest the Chinese would enforce exclusion zones on the moon? Is deconfliction possible with the Chinese working on the model of space cooperation with the Soviet Union and later Russia?
Well, they're not signing on to the Accords because they do intend to violate them. Our presence is what will help keep them from that. If we're there, if we've got flags back on the moon, and we're starting to build a base that by 2028 is permanently inhabited, that presence alone makes it far more difficult for them to suddenly close everything down and say, get out of there. How do you enforce it? Well, you don't necessarily need guns on the moon. Although, what was it, the Soviet Alamaz, I think actually had a cannon on it. And before it was the last crew left, they had fun firing it off. I hope they were firing it down towards Earth so there aren't bullets all around creation in orbit. But you don't need that. The threat that they actually made several years ago, I don't know, 10, 15 years ago, was in something they were bullying us on. They actually said, we will cut off access to rare earth minerals. So they can promise a lot of grief here on Earth if we try to do things there. It doesn't have to be a a battle on the moon like in that movie that I referenced. So Ad Astra, but they intend to win, just like they intend to win in the South China Sea, and how they won in Hong Kong, how they're gearing up for wars of conquest with Taiwan, perhaps Japan, going to their second island chain, their third island chain, and further. I think it's their fourth island chain that they've discussed. One of those islands, Hawaii. So they have global ambitions. It shouldn't be discounted that they would find ways to make us regret if we give them, give them the opportunity to claim it all as theirs.
And the last question we have is from David Chevron. He asks, what do you recommend doing at an international level or for non-US citizens here today?
Join in, as an Artemis partner for your nation. Find ways to participate. Virtually every country these days will have at the university and even high school level CubeSat programs. It's like I tell people when I'm talking to Congress who say, well, I'm not in a space state. And I says, wrong. Your high schools and universities have CubeSat programs. Your hospitals got an MRI and so forth and so forth. But yeah, get involved. Everybody everywhere in the world is going to be a part of this new space society. So we're trying to, on the macro level, establish free access to the moon and elsewhere in space for everybody. We came in peace for all mankind. China's talked about something they call vertical sovereignty, which would basically say, here's China, everything going up to geo orbit is theirs. You have a satellite ComSat up there. You can't have that anymore. That's theirs. Of course, it violates treaties, but that's what they've talked about. And they will if we let them get their way. So use the free space that we're trying to establish for all mankind and go pedal to the metal in creating any part of the spacefaring civilization you can, whether it's small, big, everything. Heck, you could literally run a lunar lander on an app on your phone. So make that app, and Godspeed to you.
All right, does anybody else have any questions for Art? All right, well, thanks, Art. Very informative, appreciate it.
And thank you so much, and kudos to everyone in the Moon Society that made this happen, and everybody who's participating. Thanks so much.
Yep, thanks everyone. See you around the conference.